The predictions about the catastrophe
As another therapy for Ebola is already being tested on Americans with COVID-19, but it's still unclear when any of these treatments will be widely available.
The State Department raised the travel advisory to the highest level, to level 4.
Dr. Anthony Fauci, the government's top expert on infectious diseases.
Printers, and welcoming you to the Thursday edition of the Coronavirus Resources for Printers webinars. And just a reminder for all of you that are joining us, this webinar series started, it seems like forever ago now. And just a reminder that our Tuesday webinars, those are still our big picture webinars where we go big topics for all printers. To help them with the challenges that they're facing with coronavirus and really more challenges too. These days it seems like well, I guess I don't want to get turn this into a whole different conversation, but as we all know, there's a whole another conversation going on in our nation that's kind of knocked coronavirus down to that #2 spot. And I might, time permitting, I might just add a little bit more about that later. However, that is where we're at on our Tuesday webinars, is providing big picture topics to help all of us through the challenges that we face. And then we have today's Thursday webinars, still appropriate for everyone to join us, and happy to have all printers join us. But we do tend to focus our Thursday webinars more on the services for our marketing ideas for printer subscribers. You're able to pick up tips that you can apply even if you're not a marketing ideas for printer subscriber. But we do dial in the focus a little bit more for our subscribers on the Thursday webinars, which of course is today. And as always on a Thursday webinar, it's Thursdays with Trish. So Trish, glad to have you being a part of this, a big part of this too. I know you've got some really important information. We're going to be talking about sliders here in a little bit, very shortly actually. And the sliders are perhaps a little bit more of an important topic these days, because we need some of those high profile places to get messages out, to get some of those coronavirus pieces of information. And we've had actually a little bit more questions about that. So we're going to talk about sliders and how you can get the best looking, the most impactful sliders on your websites from Marketing Ideas for Printers. We'll turn over into that topic very quickly. I do want to remind you that if you have questions, use the questions panel in the webinar controls, send them in, and we're going to answer as many of those as we can during the webinar. If we miss them, we'll scoop them up afterwards. And speaking of afterwards, please do stick around at the end of the webinar. Give us that few seconds of survey follow-up. The webinar will be posted on this page, coronavirusresourcesforprinters.com. And so if you need to reference any of the previous webinars, they're all here. Enough of me, Trish, take us to it. Let's talk sliders.
All right, thank you so much, Dave. And as Dave alluded to, we've got a couple topics, but we want to focus our time on sliders, slider sizing, best practices, and that sort of thing. So Dave's gonna keep me in line here, and if I forget something important, he's gonna remind me. So as Dave was mentioning, with the times we're in that, a lot of people have been focusing on needing to create custom sliders, making sure their message gets out there to their print buyers in an easy manner that makes sense to the visitors to your website. A couple points that I'll go over, and then I'm going to show some examples that is on, as you're seeing here. This is one of our demo sites with sliders, and then I'll show you some examples on my website and kind of a comparison between looking at the original image and how it's put on a slider. So one of the things I actually don't have called up right now, but episode number 13 of our Sell More Printing series, it does talk about tips for effective website slider sizing and so forth. So that's another resource that I didn't want to forget, is in our Sell More Printing series, that's once a month, episode number 13 does have some best practices for effective sliders.
And we'll make sure to get a link to that too. So if you're watching this live, know that that link will follow when that gets published. If you're watching it on the recording, all you got to do is look right below where this recording is, and you'll see the link to that. It's episode 13, and I've got my notes that is roughly at the 13-minute mark, where the big part of what we're talking about is there.
My notes say the same, so I'm glad we're on the same page. So yeah, we'll be sure to send you that link. And then, as you have probably seen with our websites, you want to make sure, first of all, that your images are wide format or landscape. You could use a vertical, and I'll show you what that looks like. But for the best bang for your buck and to make sure that your information is sent out to show up, a wide format, i.e. landscape, would be the first thing to make sure that you do. And most people do. Because as you can see when you go to the website, they are wider images. Second, with sliders, they are mobile responsive. However, we've seen recently that a lot of our subscribers, or some of them I should say, they're mentioning that when viewing on a mobile device, and even when you're viewing on a computer, some of the edges or some of the sliders getting cut off. Why is that? What's happening? And so forth. That's not to say necessarily it's by design. But one reason is that we want you to focus on the center of the slider, whether it's text, whether it's an image. And you can see with some of these that are scrolling on your screen now, the main part of the image is centered. So for instance, if we go to this with the computer, that screen in the background is more of the center. It's not on the edges of that slider. Working together as a group with these hands as another example, that's more centered. It's not on an edge where someone's hand or finger might get cut off. The words with these images, there aren't any background words. These are the words that you can decide what to put on there. The phone number, those are headers and subheaders. So at least with these examples,
like two layers, I think is what you're saying there, right? There's
very much
layer and the text layer. And that actually just reminds me, if I'm remembering right, sorry, Trish, is that text layer, that will always be, because it's presented as a text layer, that will always be on the page, whether you're looking at it on a computer like we're doing now, or on a phone. You know, it's going to drop itself right to the center, and that can expand and compress, unlike the image where it's just the image and there has to be some cutting off decisions that might have to be made there.
Yeah, that's a good point. And when you go to create a custom slider, you'll see the ability to type in a subheader, a header, and that as, would you say, more or less a separate layer. So the text and the phone numbers, and depending on your slider, what you customize to show on top of the image will always show up. But as Dave mentioned, you're resizing this on your screen, on your computer, on a phone. Some of the image might get cut off. And I do have examples to show you of that and kind of give you an idea. So going through, again, if this is an example, we encourage you to make sure that the main meat potatoes of your image is more on the center and you don't have important things on the fringes or on the edges. Another point that stuck out to me is I've seen a few sliders that as part of the image had a lot of text, and when that slider was created, some of that text was cut off on the top or bottom and perhaps a little bit on the sides. But if you have text that's near the edge and you need to make sure to your print buyers can read that and that gets cut off, well, you want to make sure that text is either less or you have it centered. And another point with that is, as you can see, they're rotating. You wouldn't necessarily want to have too much text because your print buyers might be forced to read it pretty quick, and then it's going to switch to the next slider. So in addition to size, think about the content. What is actually on the image? Is it just the image, or is it also a lot of text? Because you don't want to detract your print buyers or feel like they have to read quickly or take that all in. It's kind of a quick stop for them to determine what they need to go on to the next part of your website. And you could certainly have text on the background. That's not a problem, but just think about that as you're creating your sliders, if that's in your best interest, or if your print buyers can read through all that text that you might have as part of the image, not the separate layer that Dave was referring to.
It's almost like driving by a billboard. You have that little brief window of time to soak in that whole big billboard, which could contain thousands of words if you wanted it. But you're only going to be paying attention to that billboard span of time of words. And that, I think that would be true on these sliders as well.
That's a really good point. Pretend your print buyers are kind of driving by. So enough of the default. We're going to go to my print shop and I'm going to kind of refresh here. And what I did is took some images and added them to sliders to kind of give you a feel for what could be cut off and how they're treated, would you say. This first one here is, and it's kind of hard to see because I didn't really put as much time, but it says small 4 KBs. So this image, if I was to look at this original image right here, this is really small. This is 4 KBs. It's really small. I just wanted to give you an example of a small image. What does that look like when it's brought into a slider? Well, this is it. Obviously, we want to take up real estate because it's a wide format. It pixelates it. It's blurry. There's things cut off, but don't use a small size basically because it's going to be pixelated. It's going to look blurry. So this would be a bad example of what not to do. But I want to show you what it looks like when you're using a really small sized image. Another image here is this ended up being about 6.5 megabytes. Picture of a goldfish swimming. If we were to look at the original image of that and kind of put it side by side, you can see the top and the bottom of that fish, the fins above the eyes, maybe even a little bit to the left or right, although it's kind of hard to tell. That's getting cut off because, again, our websites are centering on the center of that image, and it's focusing on what we would think is the meat and potatoes of the main part of that image. So with that goldfish, again, we're wanting to focus on the center, even though your image might be a more complete image. Another one that I really enjoy, I enjoy maps overall. This picture of a globe, here's the original right here. There's a lot more than just the Atlantic Ocean showing. You got part of North America, Africa, and so forth. If we were to take a look at that on my website, now it's zoomed in, which is great, but you can see there's a lot of that has been cut off because, again, it's focusing on the center of that image that I was just showing you. So if we try to do this side by side, you can see there's parts that are not showing up. Again, done by design because we want to make sure that the center of that image you're using is what's put out there or what's showing up for the slider image. I'm going to keep going with a couple more. This one was a really good one I had done before and I knew it didn't look as clean, but I wanted to leave it. If we look at the original image, this is more vertical, maybe a little boxy, square, more vertical. Now it looks clean here. It's not pixelated. It looks really good. But when I use that on a slider, again, it's bringing it in and showing as much as it can, but it's of the center. And so it's a little more pixelated. Not as clear, crisp as it could be, but again, it's still doing its job of bringing in the center if we were to compare the image here. So again, that's one that I'd done before that I'd left alone. I thought, well, that's a good image to show as a comparison here. And then I have another one that I wanted to show. This one is a picture of a Coke glass here, and if I was to bring that up on my screen, now this is clearly a vertical image. It's not wide format, not a landscape. So there's a lot more going on up and down. And as you can imagine, you may have seen it scrolling. Again, our sliders are focusing on the center, but it's cutting off the top and the bottom because we're not scaling or going to take up too much real estate portrait-wise on your website. So our website correctly is showing the center, but again, it had to cut off the top and bottom because we're focusing on that landscape part. That's what we're focused on.
There's one subtle thing too that if you can go back to that, and I'll just take a little time on it, but one subtle thing, as printers, we're always used to talking about resolution and dimensions of images and resolution, but you can see what Trish has here, like this particular image is 3.9 megabytes. And so you might want to think about your images, kind of like Trish has said, more in terms of megabytes size. And that's not the end all be all resolution, but it's the reason that I wanted to bring that up, and I think we'll kind of transition to this next part as well, but we're looking at this on the browser-based, desktop browser-based, but that image is going to be not used just for browsers. It'll be also used on tablets and iPhones and smartphones. And so there isn't a one-size-fits-all image requirement. And that's why it's important to have perhaps a little bit of a larger file size. And again, it's not so much a file size thing as it is just making sure there's enough resolution in there. But that's what's going to give your website the best opportunity to adapt that image for all possible displays.
Yeah, and along with that, I have a couple more show and tell to give you kind of a feel before I show you my phone or do a comparison. If I take this browser and kind of move it around and shrink it down to more of what you might see on a phone, as you can see here, our default or that second layer of text always shows up along with the button, but as you can see on here, the slider is getting cut off and it might resize. Now in this case, the fish is there, but now there's some left parts of that fish that's getting cut off. Now you can see on that globe, there's more of the left and right getting cut off. So we still focus on showing the center of an image, but when that's mobile responsive, parts of that slider may be switched or cut off to fit the dimensions of that mobile device. So now that vertical image of that coat glass might look a little bit better on a mobile device because usually you're in vertical mode, but again, there's still going to be possibly cut off on the left and right. So we focus again on that middle part of the image.
And what you're doing right there too is remember that the websites start with that default set of sliders. And what Trish is showing here is custom sliders. And that's a great way because you can preview those custom sliders before you launch them. And what Trish is doing here by resizing it, that's a great way to check. Say, is it working on the desktop computers the way I expect? Is it working on tablets? Is it working on mobile devices, smartphones? Just doing that browser, simulating those different sizes is a great way to make sure that your slider is going to be effective at all different usages.
Yep, and a great point that I didn't want to forget, and maybe you've seen this if you create custom sliders, but we encourage you before you check to use a custom slider, which will say custom in parentheses, there's a preview button, so you can quickly select preview, and then you're able to preview any of your custom sliders, or really any of the sliders that are available to you, so you can preview that. One other thing that I also wanted to show, and we'll see if this is a good or a bad idea, Dave had brought up before in conversation internally about Facebook, and depending if you use Facebook or pay attention, there's a little round image, and then in the background, there's a larger image. And on my Facebook page on my computer, when I compare it to my phone, and I don't mind sharing my page here, so I have a larger image on the background of some frost on some leftover corn or what have you in the field. And it'll be hard to see, but on my phone, on the top, there's more of the sun. There's definitely more of that image showing up. Now, again, when you look on a computer, or depending on what you're looking at, Facebook kind of does the same thing as where they're cutting off some of that image. And so again, it relates to mobile responsiveness, what type of device is going to be looking at that image. So Facebook does a little bit of that cropping too to fit whatever dimensions that they're referring to here. Let's see if I have any wrap-up notes here. So main talking points or main things to remember is these sliders, you want to make sure they're high quality, as Dave said, a high enough resolution. Also make sure they're wide format or that landscape. And then you want to make sure that you preview this. Maybe play around by moving around your browser, making this a little bit narrow. Get a feel for it to see if it's still going to get that message across or get that image across, whether it's small or large. So again, we want to make sure we know we've had a lot of questions with sliders, but we're hoping that this will prove a little bit more helpful and that you'll experiment a little bit more, or at least see some of the reasons on why it might be getting cut off, on how you can prevent that, or at least center some of the meat and potatoes of your image in the middle so that the information does not get cut off.
So let's bring that back to the reason why you might use a slider. We already touched on it, tying it back to coronavirus, and really can be anything where you want to bring some more attention to whatever you need to do that. we would encourage you, as with all parts of the website, but to make it your own. Build the custom information. In today's topic, it's custom sliders, and build that in so that you can truly own your website. We love it then when people turn it into your own story. You know, that's good for everything. It's good for your own success to break away from the mold of that starting point and tell your story. That's what custom sliders can do. Remember that you have control over the message on those custom sliders, both on that image layer behind and the text that's on top, and then also that button that shows up in there too. So you can direct that button anywhere you want, whether that's a page on your own website or a page to an outside website. Lots of options in there. So keep that in mind. We got into the weeds, rightly so, of how to build the sliders and how to make sure that they're all presenting correctly. But remember, the reason to do that is to tell your story and to get the link of that slider out to where it needs to be, so you get that high impact story right away, front and center on the website.
So glad you mentioned that, Dave.
Yeah, and I think that takes us right up to the end. I don't want to step on anything that you had left. Any other last notes that you had on that?
No, I'm just looking over, and I think we hopefully hit the main points that if people have questions, but if you still have questions, again, feel free to reach out to us with our tech support team or our 1-800 number, and we'd be happy to help you out with that. So I really don't have anything more with that topic.
Well, that's where we will end it today. Come back on Tuesday. If you have been working through any of the PPP loans program and want to know about how to convert some of those loans into grants, that seems to be a topic that kind of moves all over the place. We're going to talk about that on Tuesday's webinar, so we'd invite you back for that. But for now, stick around and give us just a few more seconds of your time, please. And we're going to go ahead and ask you to fill out that survey. It can be just a few seconds, or you can stick around longer and give us more detailed feedback. It's all yours now. So we are out of here for today and invite you to come back the next time. Thanks for showing up today.